many of us on this committee have been trying to determine the exact cost of retrofitting the Qatari royal family's gift of a Boeing 747 jumbo jet to President Trump.
Funds for the department should be used for our nation's substantive defense, not a flashy object that boosts the president's ego.
And we all know where this is headed, to the president's library.
I think the narrative that you're drawing is just not factual, sir. That has not been said. The president has never came out and said he's putting this in the library. He said it in a joke one time. The narrative that you guys are drawing just isn't accurate.
I think that President Trump's decision to accept this foreign plane is really an outrageous bribe.
With all due respect, Madam Vice Chair, when you say that the President of the United States has been bribed,
I said potential.
that's pretty strong.
I will now turn to Senator McConnell for a manager's package.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You have a collection that makes up the manager's package that we've worked through on a bipartisan basis. This package has been negotiated and agreed to, as I indicated, by both sides. I ask that it be adopted by unanimous consent.
Are there any objections? Without objection, the manager's package is agreed to. Are there members who wish to offer an amendment to the bill? Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We are distributing the Shaheen amendment. I don't know if there's a number for this amendment, but it is just 2 lines, and it says, none of the funds appropriated or otherwise made available in this act or any other act shall be used to operate or modify a Boeing 747-8I transferred from Qatar. Since it was announced in May, I think many of us on this committee have been trying to determine the exact cost of retrofitting the Qatari royal family's gift of a Boeing 747 jumbo jet to President Trump. In addition to the security and ethical concerns with accepting a foreign gift of this nature, there are real issues around the cost of this retrofit that have not been explained, as well as whether how long it will take, and once that's done, whether in fact it will be as secure as Air Force One, which, as we know, is currently being completed by Boeing. It's been reported that the jet could cost up to $1 billion for necessary security controls, but we've not been able to get an accurate estimate from the Air Force, and they've continued to downplay the full cost. When I asked this of the Secretary of Defense at the hearing, he told us that that number was classified. But finally, during the Air Force Secretary's testimony to the Defense Subcommittee this year on the Air Force budget, he admitted for the first time that the funds to upgrade the Qatari plane were reprogrammed from the nuclear modernization budget, specifically from the Sentinel program. Now, it's been reported that this transfer was done through reprogramming authority that was granted to the Department of Defense in the continuing resolution, and that it could be at least $900 million. I understand, like others on the committee, that the Sentinel program is over budget, but I think it weakens our credibility to take funding from nuclear modernization and move it into a project that there are still serious unanswered concerns about how much money it's going to take, and whether it would, in the end, give us a plane that is going to be as secure as Air Force One. So that's why this amendment, I hope the members of this committee will consider it carefully, and I intend to vote for it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Chairman McConnell.
Well, this jet was just delivered to the Department of Defense. Would need to have a classified briefing to understand any proposed modifications and the risk of not applying them. The aircraft timeline is such that it's not going to be modified with fiscal $26 in any event, making this a poison pill for political amendment better suited for the NDAA. Therefore, I would recommend a no vote.
Are there other members who wish to speak? Senator Coons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I might briefly, I want to thank Senator Shaheen for offering this valuable amendment to prevent the department from using nearly $1 billion in taxpayer funds to retrofit the Qatari Royal plane to serve as a temporary Air Force One. As she mentioned, it raises both security and ethical questions. And the White House took advantage of the lax standards of the FY25 continuing resolution to push through a vanity project. Funds for the department should be used for our nation's substantive defense, not a flashy object that boosts the president's ego. I urge my colleagues to vote yes.
Senator Reid.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I, too, support Senator Shaheen's amendment. I believe Senator Murphy has an amendment on this topic, too. I was at the subcommittee hearing, and I asked the Secretary of Defense directly, can you tell us the top-line number for the reconfiguration of the aircraft and the delivery date? And he told us, no, it's classified. You know, that's ridiculous. If it's classified, I wouldn't classify it as secret. I'd classify it as embarrassing, because it will cost at least $1 billion, at least $1 billion. And it probably will take 1 or 2 years to complete this aircraft. And we all know where this is headed, to the President's library. A fully functional aircraft, which is going to be delivered to the President's library, which I presume he will use with the permission of the library, although the library will pay for it. This is completely, I think, unacceptable. It's never been done before by any president. To stop it now, I think, makes sense. Senator Murphy's suggestion, I think, is that at least it spends its useful life in the Department of the Air Force where it should. This is being transferred to the Air Force. But as soon as the president leaves office, a functionally useful aircraft is going to accompany him. The only precedent I think we have here is the aircraft at the Ronald Reagan Library in California, and that was completely stripped of its engines and everything else, so it could be a model, a display. That's not the intent, I think, of the president right now. He wants a free plane when he leaves. So I would very strongly urge that this amendment be passed, and if not, Senator Murphy's amendment be passed. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Senator McConnell, then Senator Mullen.
I just wanted to say to my good friend, Senator Reid, I'm proud of the fact that the NDAA passes every year, but this bill has to be signed, in order to fund what we believe is in the best interest of the country.
Senator Mullen.
I have a tremendous amount of respect for the ranking member, but I think the narrative that you're drawing is just not factual, sir. That has not been said. The president has never came out and said he's putting this in the library. He said it in a joke one time, but the truth is that because you've been in the briefing, I've been in the briefing, they actually talked about using this particular plane for the vice president in the next presidential election, or the next president that sets President 40, whoever the 48th president of the United States is. They're talking about using the current one that has been in the air for over 35 years to possibly be retired and go in the presidential library. You and I sat in that same conversation, that same briefing. And so the narrative that you're drawing is just not factual. And then the plane itself, for those that don't know, but those that do know, because there's a few of us that was in the briefing that was on the armed services, this plane was offered during the President Biden's administration. They actually started negotiating this in August. And I was in Qatar when the Prime Minister originally talked to me about it. I came back and actually talked to our committee about it at the time, because there was an issue on how they could actually do it, if it could be a gift, or it could be a transfer, or if the Department of Defense could take it, or it could go straight to the executive branch. That conversation happened. And so the narrative that you guys are drawing just isn't accurate. And I wish if you guys are going to have concerns that you actually speak from it on a actual perspective, not a political point. Now, if we want to talk about dollars and what it's going to take to retrofit it, fine. We can do that. But the current Air Force Two is also completely outdated, and the current Air Force One is completely outdated. So what are we supposed to do? Keep flying old airplanes? I just want to know what the solution is here.
Senator Murray.
Well, thank you very much. Look, I think that President Trump's decision to accept this foreign plane is really an outrageous bribe. Under no circumstances should our taxpayers be on the hook for this massive cost to modify and use a foreign plane as Air Force One. The funding that Congress appropriates in this bill should take care of our service members and provide them with cutting-edge capabilities, not spent unnecessarily to retrofit a royal plane. This is massively wasteful, and actually the next generation Air Force One is already in the pipeline. And I also, by the way, think it is a huge security vulnerability on this plane. This amendment that the Senator's office offers would prevent the Department of Defense from wasting any more precious taxpayer resources on a truly corrupt and, I believe, wasteful endeavor. So I hope my colleagues vote yes.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't really have a dog in this hunt. I think, like Senator McConnell, we ought to be driven by the numbers. And in order to be driven by the numbers, you've got to have the numbers first. But I've sat here this morning, and I appreciate the bipartisan words. But with all due respect, Madam Vice Chair, when you say that the President of the United States has been bribed,
I said potential.
that's pretty strong. When you say that the director of the Office of Management and Budget is corrupt, that's pretty strong. And I think if you're going to say someone has been bribed or someone is corrupt, you ought to be specific. And I notice you haven't been. And I don't think this is, I've listened to a lot of pretty words about bipartisanship, but then we get personal. I don't think it's productive. It's up to you. This is America. You can say and believe what you want. But if you're going to say somebody's been bribed, you need to say specifically by whom, for what. If you say Russ Vogt is corrupt, I want to know what that means, with all due respect.
Senator Murkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I am going to be opposing the Shaheen amendment and perhaps others that may be introduced with regards to this aircraft. But I don't want my no vote to be assumed that I'm okay with where we are with this transfer, that I'm okay not knowing the numbers behind it, that I am perhaps okay with the appearances because I have concerns about them. But what I have is the utmost respect and regard for the chairman and the vice chair of this subcommittee that have executed a pretty strong defense bill. And I am going to vote no on this amendment, but that is because I think the imperative in passing this bill overrides any concerns that I may have now about where we are with this transfer of this aircraft. I just wanted that stated for the record. Thank you, ma'am.
Are there other senators who wish to comment? Senator Shaheen.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and my intent is not to derail the underlying bill, but it is, and I would say to Senator Mullen and Senator Kennedy both, I didn't accuse anybody of fraud. I said it raises serious concerns about the implications. And I would say to anyone who was on SAC-D, if you haven't read the classified information about what is going to be entailed in producing this plane, you need to do that, because there are serious questions that haven't been answered, and they won't give us answers. So my concern is aimed at the Secretary of Defense, at, as I said, we finally got some insights when we heard from the Secretary of the Air Force, who admitted that the money's going to be transferred from the Sentinel program, which is already a concern for us. So I think there are serious concerns that are raised. I don't want to derail this underlying bill. I think it's really important for us to pass it. But I do think we ought to be asking questions about what's going on here, because there are real ramifications for our military, for the Department of Defense, for our future. And I agree with you, Senator Mullen. We need to have secure planes for the president and vice president to fly in. And what's going to be done as the result of this is not going to give us that secure plane. And spending $1 billion to do that, I think, is a real issue that we should all be concerned about. So thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to withdraw this amendment if there are concerns about it. But I do think we need to be paying attention, and we aren't currently.
I appreciate the withdrawal of the amendment. Are there other amendments?
I have a
Senator-
comment. I have a comment.
I'm sorry, Senator Reed.
Thank you very much. First of all, I hope my comments weren't interpreted. It's on. I got to get close. Thank you. I hope my comments weren't interpreted as questioning the legality or of anyone's activities. But the fact is that this aircraft has been thoroughly considered for donations to the President's Library. We all know that. And this is not something that's going to go in the Air Force and just be another Air Force aircraft. In fact, it's ABC reporter, Attorney General Pam Bondi and Trump's top White House lawyer, David Warrington, concluded it would be legally permissible for the donation of the aircraft to be conditioned on transferring its ownership to Trump's presidential library before the end of his term, according to sources familiar with their determination. So the contemplation is very clear, and it's been documented. This is going to be transformed with Air Force money and then given to the library. I don't think that's an appropriate use of Air Force money. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I have an amendment which I'd like to have circulated to the Department of Defense bill. Madam Chair, this amendment would ensure the Department of Defense funding is used for defense, not as a blank check for the Department of Homeland Security. A few years ago, with the passing of Senator Inouye, I found myself surprisingly in a position of chairing this subcommittee. It is an enormous responsibility. I salute Senator McConnell, Senator Coons, and one of the best appropriation staffs on the Hill for putting together this massive work. But what they've tried to do, and was explained by both the ranking member and the chair of the subcommittee, is to take limited resources and make sure they're spent well to keep America safe. What I'm addressing here is a practice which many members of the Senate may not be aware of. This amendment addresses a practice where the Department of Defense is called on to loan money to other departments, sometimes reimbursable, sometimes not. This bill would prohibit the Department of Defense from supporting DHS immigration enforcement on a non-reimbursable basis. In other words, if the Department of Homeland Security is going to spend the money for that purpose, let them do so. But if they're going to borrow it from the Department of Defense, pay it back. Immigration enforcement should be no different than other agencies. For example, when we have a natural disaster and the Stafford loan is activated, we have had instances in the past where the Department of Defense has provided the money to pay off for that natural disaster with the understanding they would be paid back, except in extraordinary circumstances. So it is done, but it's done on a reimbursable basis. So let's take a look at what's happened so far. So far this year, in the last few months, the Department of Homeland Security has borrowed $900 million from the Department of Defense not to be reimbursed. 900 million. The estimate is by the end of this year, it will be $2 billion. What does that mean? Give you an example. How are we going to house people who are being deported? You can house them through DHS facilities, or you can house them through Department of Defense. The decision was made, let's do it at Guantanamo. How does that sound? Well, let's take a look at what that is costing as an example. For 180 individuals to be housed in Guantanamo for the Department of Homeland Security on a 3-month basis costs $40 million. How much is that per night? $72,000 a night for each one of the detainees because they chose to put them in Guantanamo in a DOD facility and incidentally not reimburse the Department of Defense for the expenditure to do this. What if they used the DHS facility to house these individuals? How much would that cost, Senator? Less than $3.2 million for the same group of 180 million. Instead of a $72,000 a night place for them to sleep in Guantanamo, it's merely $7,000 a night. The point I'm trying to make to you is this going to be an expensive undertaking, this notion of massive deportation. It's going to involve moving around a lot of money in a lot of ways. Reconciliation already addressed some part of this. All I'm saying is that if you're going to borrow the money from the Department of Defense to pay for this massive deportation, pay it back. This money has been appropriated for the defense of our nation. That's how it should be spent.
Senator McConnell.
Well, we've certainly had a lot of back and forth about the border over the years. Well, here's the factual situation. Unchecked migration at the southern border represents, we would all agree, a national security threat. The administration's policies, including DOD support to the border, have helped dramatically curtail the threat. As a practical matter, this is a poison pill amendment, but even more important than that, it's a hypocritical one. You may or may not remember that the Obama and Biden administrations used DOD assets to support border and immigration activities. In fact, during the previous administration, Democrats not only used DOD to assist DHS, but objected to efforts to get DHS to reimburse DOD. This is also a political debate masquerading as a budget debate. So I would ask my colleagues to reject the amendment.
Are there further comments on the amendment? Senator Coons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, both parties support border enforcement and common sense immigration reform. DOD has been dragged, and service members have been dragged into a separate set of activities like paying for migrant detention centers or flying deportation flights that have no law enforcement on board. DOD's diverted hundreds of millions of dollars away from training and service members by reallocating these funds. As the former chairman of the subcommittee said, DOD's diverted about $900 million that this committee had appropriated for troops, and they admit it'll be in the billions before we're done. DHS was just provided $160 billion for these purposes, so there's no reason DOD should continue to provide this support on a non-reimbursable basis. There's lots of legitimate military needs we have to meet. I would encourage a yes vote on this amendment.